Well, let's bring in Sol Takahashi. He's a professor of human rights and peace studies at Osaka Jogakin University. He's also a former deputy head at the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in occupied Palestine. He joins us today from Baku. Professor, these initiatives by Western countries, the airdrops, a new port, a maritime corridor, they essentially bypass the bottlenecks and the constraints on the land borders, which are happening because Israel says they need to check all of the aid going into the Strip. These new aid routes, though, presumably also require approval or cooperation of Israel. So is Israel now essentially saying those checks aren't necessary? Why not then just let the trucks in?
I mean, look, this is not predominantly a humanitarian issue. This is not some kind of, natural disaster, a tsunami or an earthquake or anything like that. This is like you say, a man-made disaster. It is a genocide. The Israelis are inflicting genocide on the Palestinians. Now, if the Americans or the EU gave a hoot about Palestinian lives, what they should be doing is not pretending like they are Hollywood action heroes and, airlifting supplies into Berlin. What they should be doing is stopping the endless flow of weapons and stopping the political support for Israeli genocide. And they should be, Biden could halt all of this tomorrow with one phone call. And the fact that they are not doing it, the fact that Biden is not doing it really shows me that he must think American voters are really stupid.
Are these new plans then, do you think, also a tacit acknowledgement of sorts that the US and its allies, aside from the arms that you're talking about, essentially don't have the influence beyond that to get Israel to live up to basic international legal obligations?
Well, the notion that they don't have the influence is ludicrous. I mean, without the weapons, without the political support, all of this would stop tomorrow. And if the Americans and the EU really cared about Palestinian lives, if they really cared about Palestinian rights and the Palestinian right of self-determination, they could take much more effective steps that would really alleviate the situation tomorrow. The fact that they're not doing it shows that they don't really care. And all of this is for domestic consumption, basically.
Sure. Let me ask you a little bit about what logistics might look like on the ground if all of this does go ahead. As someone who's worked for the UN, these are obviously ways to get aid into Gaza, but how do you then deal with the distribution on the ground once it's inside?
Well, look, all of these are logistical details that need to be sorted out. But like I've said, this is not predominantly a humanitarian issue. If the Israelis were to allow the proper distribution of humanitarian aid, like the International Court of Justice ordered them to do, then all of this could be sorted out, within a very short period of time. But the fact that, we're even talking about this just goes to show that the Israelis have no intention whatsoever of allowing this. And they're being aided and abetted in all of this by the Western governments.
Let me ask you about the narrative that this perpetuates here. The World Food Programme has had to suspend operations in the north because it can't guarantee security there. I know some observers are now using the phrase collective humiliation. So Israel's creating the conditions for the level of desperation and the lawlessness that comes with that as people try to keep their families alive.
Well, yes, for sure. I mean, the entire Israeli occupation of Palestine, and I'm including 48 within this, is based on collective humiliation, a daily humiliation, which is geared towards encouraging and pushing Palestinians out of their homes and out of their lands. So yes, this is just another extension, just another level of humiliation and another level of genocide, which what we're witnessing.
Let me ask you one thing about the US plan that really struck me. The Pentagon saying it could take up to 2 months to build this temporary port. I mean, that surely gives us some insight into how the White House feels that ceasefire negotiations are going, how long the White House thinks this war and the siege will last.
Well, look, yes. I mean, my personal opinion is that probably Biden just sort of announced this initiative without real knowledge of how long it would take. But look, really, it is for domestic consumption. Like I just said, he must really think that the rest of the world, and frankly, American voters, are really stupid to think that, they would be fooled by this act of Hollywood action hero, airlifting supplies into Berlin. This is not what this is about. This is a man-made disaster. This is a genocide inflicted by the Israelis, and the Americans could stop it immediately with one phone call.
Professor, you yourself used to work for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Given the political context that you've sketched out for us here, what role do you now see for the United Nations here?
Well, the United Nations has had a very, very difficult time in trying to get the actors here, and in particular Israel, to abide by its obligations under international law. And unfortunately, that remains. And we see, as we see with the defunding of UNRWA, many of the Western governments are just all too happy to buy into Israeli narratives about the role that the UN is playing and should be playing. So it's a very difficult situation.
Sol Takahashi there, Professor of Human Rights and Peace Studies at Osaka Jogaquin University. Thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera, sir, and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Will the Russia-Ukraine war spill over beyond its borders? Well, the risk of a wider conflict is increasing by the day. Poland, it's now said that the presence of NATO troops in Ukraine is not unthinkable. This is the clearest indication of a possible and direct NATO involvement in the Ukraine war. Poland's foreign minister made these comments during an event marking the 25th anniversary of Poland's accession to NATO. He further appreciated French President Emmanuel Macron for not ruling out the possibility in a public statement earlier this month. Although France's statement did not find any takers among Western countries, it did spark a larger debate over Europe's support for Ukraine. Remember, the leaked call recording of German military officials also hinted at the presence of British troops in a war-torn country. British troops are reportedly training Ukrainian soldiers in using long-range weapons. Both the incidents had received backlash from Russia, with Kremlin warning that NATO troops' presence in Ukraine could risk a global nuclear conflict.
Действия США и их сателлитов фактически привели к демонтажу системы европейской безопасности. Это порождает риски для всех. Очевидно, что необходимо работать над тем, чтобы уже в обозримой перспективе формировать новый контур равной и неделимой безопасности в Евразии. Мы готовы к предметному разговору.
On the battlefield, Ukraine, it's already admitted that it's outgunned and outnumbered. Aid from the United States is blocked. Ammunition from European Union is slowing down. Ukraine says delays in aid shipments, it's costing the country more lives and territory. So will Russia's continuous gains drag Ukraine's allies in the war and escalate the risk of nuclear war? Now, that's a question that remains unanswered.
Guterres told the Council that there was now a serious risk that the conflict could ignite instability of dramatic proportions, from the Sahel to the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea, while in Sudan, fighting continues to rage across numerous states, resulting in the world's largest internal displacement crisis, currently at 6.3 million people.
It is time to silence the guns and raise the volume for peace. In just days, the holy month of Ramadan will commence. So from this chamber today, I'm making an appeal. I call on all parties in Sudan to honor the values of Ramadan by honoring a Ramadan cessation of hostilities. This cessation of hostilities must lead to a definitive silencing of the guns across the country and set out a firm path towards lasting peace for the Sudanese people. The values of Ramadan must prevail.
The experts' report says Darfur is experiencing its worst violence since 2005 and that an excess of mediation tracks, entrenched positions of the warring parties, in addition to competing regional interests, meant that those peace efforts have yet to stop the war, result in a political settlement, or address what is a deteriorating humanitarian crisis in the country. The World Food Programme warned this week that the war in Sudan risks triggering the world's largest hunger crisis, with over 25 million people across Sudan, South Sudan and Chad trapped in a spiral of deteriorating food insecurity. The UN chief said they were already receiving reports of children dying from malnutrition, echoing scenes currently being witnessed in Gaza.
It is also critical to address the chronic food insecurity crisis in parts of Darfur and other hard-to-reach areas. Countless lives are at stake, and time is of essence. In accordance with the Jeddah Declaration, authorities must allow full and immediate humanitarian access to all vulnerable populations, regardless of where they are and who controls the area. All routes must be utilized, including both road and air corridors, to maximize the aid response and save lives, and all routes must remain open to allow a steady and sustainable flow of assistance and not be subject to burdensome and unreasonable restrictions or impediments. We encourage the Sudanese authorities to ensure the swift implementation of these measures and to continue efforts to facilitate humanitarian access, including across conflict lines.
Warning further that the human rights situation continued to spiral out of control, with indiscriminate attacks by both the RAF and the SAF that have killed or injured a significant number of civilians.
We see continuing and widespread looting, arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearances, torture, recruitment and detention of children, alongside the shrinking of civic space. We are also receiving troubling reports of systematic conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, as well as abduction and trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. I call on the parties to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law, to protect civilians, and to facilitate safe and unimpeded humanitarian access as they have committed to.
Thank you, Secretary General, for your sobering update.
The United Kingdom, the pen holder in the Council on Sudan, says it's introduced a draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire before Ramadan, a draft it hopes to put to a vote by Friday. Sherwin Riceby's SABC News, New York.
The situation in Haiti is deteriorating day by day. Months of violence has led to unrest in the Caribbean nation. Various powerful gangs want to oust Prime Minister Ariel Henry, and now Haiti's ex-coup leader, in an interview to Reuters, mentioned his wish of becoming the president. Guy Philippe, who led a coup in 2004, has returned to the Caribbean island. He returned last year after serving prison sentence in the United States.
Hugo Chavez was in prison. Lula was in prison. Petro in Brazil was in prison. Mojica in Uruguay was in prison. And so, if my people believe and trust me, I will be their leader. It's up to my people, no one else.
In 2004, Philippe was one of the main leaders in successfully overthrowing President Jean Bertrand. Philippe had a failed run for president in 2006 before winning a Senate seat in 2016, though he was arrested and extradited to the United States before he could be sworn in. He was then deported from the US to Haiti in November after serving 6 years in prison for a money laundering case. Meanwhile, the streets of Port-au-Prince continue to show signs of violence that have paralyzed the capital in the past few days. Deadly fighting between armed gangs and police escalated in Haiti this week, with Gang Alliance leader Jimmy Cherizier, also known as Barbecue, issuing a call to topple the unelected and largely absent government. Embattled Prime Minister Henry left Haiti last week to secure Kenya's leadership for a long-delayed UN-backed security mission, which he first requested in 2022. To help fight the gangs. He is believed to still be in Puerto Rico, where he arrived on Tuesday. The government extended on Thursday a state of emergency around the capital as the violence has forced thousands to flee their homes and the main airport to close.
Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali continue to show a united front under a mutual defense pact known as the Alliance of Sahel States. The army chiefs of the alliance concluded a meeting where they agreed in combining efforts to fight off insurgents.
The current socio-political context, which is characterized by the pursuit of state sovereignty, has brought us together as a community of destiny. It is therefore imperative that we work together to address the challenges of security.
No details were given on the size of the joint force. Political analysts believe acquiring weapons for the troops is a crucial step.
Unifying staff and pooling human and material resources will be a crucial first step. Currently, the three countries are making significant efforts to acquire weapons to defeat terrorism. The first victory we achieved was to cut off the terrorists' access to fuel and weapons. The next phase is to sweep the territory and eliminate all terrorists.
In January, Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali announced their withdrawal from ECOWAS. The West African Regional Bloc has urged the country's military leaders to consider reconciliation. But many citizens say it is no longer an option.
The Alliance of Sahel States considers the ECOWAS appeal a non-event as we have already left the organization. We cannot go back and must now seek to cooperate with other supportive partners. The creation of this joint force confirms our intention to not return to ECOWAS, which we consider a thing of the past.
The joint force will be a defense force for our territory, which is a win-win situation for our three countries. Although it is a new army, we have high hopes that it will effectively combat terrorism in our common space. We no longer need ECOWAS to help us.
As Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali forge growing military ties, the countries are also considering setting up their own common currency and ditching the CFA franc used in most francophone countries in West Africa. Sharon Baranga, CGTN.